The handshake lasted 4 seconds. Jack Nicklaus held his smile, and his eyes said something colder. This is the moment that threw the PGA Tour into shock. The day the Golden Bear stopped pretending. Muirfield Village weeks ago, on the course he shaped out of Ohio farmland with his own hands. Across from him sat Brian Rolapp, a football man barely a year into golf, holding a blueprint the legend never blessed. Rewind 3 days. Nicklaus leaned into a microphone at his own memorial, and 86 years of restraint cracked. He can't stomach watching the sport's crown jewels bulldozed into one suffocating pileup. Ignore it, he warns, and the tournament he built in 1976 gets swallowed whole. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Rolapp's shiny new plan was announced in full, yet the ugliest consequences got buried under the applause. What Jack Nicklaus reveals, without ever meaning to, are 5 secrets hiding in plain sight. The exact truths Rolapp tried to hide behind corporate polish and sponsor smiles. Subscribe now and stand with the golf faithful who refuse the sanitized version. So let's drag the first one into the light. The first thing Rolapp softened for the cameras was a single brutal word: relegation. He never handed it to the fans in that plain form. Instead, he wrapped it in the warmer language of meritocracy and borrowed the glamour of English football, where clubs climb into the Premier League or tumble into the championship on the strength of their results. Play well, he told his membership back in the spring, and you earn your way toward the biggest events and the richest purses. On the surface, that reads like pure opportunity. Turn the sentence over and the buried half stares back at you. Every golfer lifted up demands another golfer knocked down. The 2-track system Rolapp sketched runs on precisely that mechanism. A track 1 of elevated tournaments reserved for the elite, and a track 2 sitting underneath it, funneling a few names upward each season while shoving others back into the shadows. For a superstar, that structure is a playground. For the journeyman ranked 99th in the world, grinding through Monday qualifiers and sleeping in budget hotels to keep his card, it is a trap door with his name written on it. Nicklaus understood that math instantly because he has spent 7 decades watching careers hang by a single missed cut, which leads straight into the second thing that vanished beneath the sponsor smiles. Rolapp admitted almost in passing that players probably would not move freely between the 2 tracks once the walls went up. Read that slowly. A golfer who slips down to track 2 does not simply compete for smaller checks. He gets separated from the stars entirely, cut off from the marquee fields, the network cameras, and the audiences that build a name. Rolapp even let the real logic show when he explained the sponsor side of it, noting that the bigger events carry a price point not everyone can afford, and that the lower tier offers a cheaper entry for brands with smaller budgets. Strip away the boardroom vocabulary, and you are left with a caste system dressed as a schedule. One tier gets the wealth, the coverage, and the prestige. The other tier gets the leftovers and the polite fiction that it still matters. The Golden Bear helped invent this circuit so that competitors would answer to competition rather than to a hierarchy handed down from above, and now an outsider proposes to sort those same competitors into a permanent upstairs and downstairs. The third truth Rolapp glossed over is the one that cuts closest to Nicklaus personally, and it is why his voice tightened at that memorial microphone. Cram the sport's heaviest events into one narrow stretch, and the mid-sized tournaments caught in that crossfire quietly suffocate. Nicklaus laid the wreckage out himself, event by event. He pointed to the Cognizant Classic in Florida, a tournament tied to his own name and to PGA National, and then he listed the giants pressing in on either side of it. Pebble Beach on one flank, the Los Angeles Stop, Tigers Genesis Invitational close behind, Bay Hill and the Players' Championship looming just after. Wedged in the middle of that gauntlet, he asked the only honest question available. What chance does a tournament like that actually have? The answer is none. The stars skip it to save their legs, the broadcasts drift toward the bigger names, and a decades-old event with real community and charitable roots slowly bleeds relevance. Even the memorial itself, the tournament Nicklaus founded in 1976 and once positioned as the crown jewel of the stretch between the Masters and the U.S. Open, has been reduced to one of roughly 9 events carrying a $20 million purse, with plans to mint even more. He built a cathedral, and the new blueprint files it away as another room in a crowded hallway. Notice the personal wound underneath the business complaint. 2 years ago, the tour shifted the memorial to the week before the U.S. Open, a slot Nicklaus disliked but accepted out of deference to the organization he helped create. A year later, it moved back to its traditional home after Memorial Day, 2 weeks clear of the U.S. Open, and the relief in his acceptance told its own story. A man does not spend half a century polishing a single tournament only to watch a newcomer treat its calendar position as a chess piece. Rolapp's plan does not attack the memorial directly. It does something quieter and, in Nicklaus's eyes, more dangerous. It floods the market with so many blockbuster weeks that no individual event, however storied, can breathe. The fourth thing, hiding in plain sight, has almost nothing to do with golf and everything to do with television. When Rolapp walked through his themes, he flagged that the tour currently competes in only 4 of the 10 largest media markets in the United States, and he framed that as an opportunity waiting to be seized. He rattled off the targets a football executive would chase: New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Washington, Boston. He talked about opening the season big at an iconic venue in the West so the broadcast could finish in prime time on the East Coast. Set the marketing gloss aside, and a colder priority emerges. The schedule is being redesigned to serve the broadcast window rather than the golf, and the courses that built this tour across generations sit exposed. A venue with deep history but a small television footprint becomes a liability on a spreadsheet. A tournament rooted in a mid-sized community, the kind that once handed rising players and struggling veterans a rare shot at a paycheck, suddenly has to justify itself against a big city ratings projection. Rolapp arrived from the NFL, a league that long ago learned to bend its product around the demands of the camera, and he is importing that instinct wholesale into a sport that used to measure itself by tradition instead of Nielsen numbers. The fifth secret is the one that ties the other 4 into a single, uncomfortable shape, and it explains why Nicklaus refuses to simply nod along. Rolapp floated the idea of injecting match play into the postseason, either at the Tour Championship or spread across the closing stretch, chasing what he called win-or-go-home drama for fans hungry for a knockout finish. On its own, that sounds like harmless spice. Placed beside everything else, it reveals the real project. The 4-round stroke play grind that has defined professional golf for more than a century is being reshaped into a television format engineered for spikes of tension and sudden eliminations. The game is being taught to behave like a playoff bracket, and here sits the deepest truth beneath all 5, the one no press release will ever print. The man redrawing golf never earned a living playing it. Rolapp is an operator, brilliant at monetizing attention, fluent in the language of purses, price points, and media markets. His plan has already ballooned prize money to levels that thrill the players and quietly strain the sponsors footing the bill. A tension the tour is still learning to manage in a world reshaped by LIV's arrival. What the plan optimizes for is value extracted from eyeballs, not the health of the game as its founders understood it. That is the collision the cameras at Muirfield Village could not fully capture. Nicklaus is not a bitter old man swinging at progress, and it matters that he said so plainly. He called the tour probably the healthiest it has ever been, praised the depth of talent, acknowledged the international pipelines feeding it from Europe, the Pacific, and South America, and stated flatly that he feels proud of what he and a few others started back in 1968. That balance is exactly what gives his warning its weight. A reflexive critic can be dismissed. A founder who admits the enterprise is thriving and still senses something being traded away is far harder to wave off. His fear is not that the tour will fail tomorrow. His fear is that the specific things that made it worth building, the room for smaller events to matter, and the resistance to a rigid hierarchy, are being engineered out of it while the money looks better than ever. The history sharpens the irony to a fine point. In 1968, Nicklaus stood alongside Arnold Palmer and Gardner Dickinson and helped pull the players away from the PGA of America, forming the division that would eventually take the name PGA Tour under Dean Beman in the mid-70s. Their grievance then was blunt. Club professionals controlled the schedule, the policies, and the flow of money, and the touring players had almost no say over decisions that shaped their own careers. When they signed an entry form in that era, they were effectively signing away their rights down to their endorsements. So they broke free and built a structure that answered to the competitors themselves. Now, more than half a century on, Nicklaus watches an executive who came from outside the sport propose a model that sorts those competitors into tracks, gates their access to the biggest stages, and threatens to relegate the ones who fall short. The autonomy he fought to win is being quietly reorganized into a corporate ladder, and he is old enough and honest enough to say it out loud regardless of who wins. He also made clear he has not yet had the real conversation, the one that happens away from the microphones. He said he wanted to sit down with Rolapp and with Commissioner Jay Monahan and talk it through properly, and days later that first face-to-face finally happened on his own turf at Muirfield Village. Whatever passed between them stayed private, but the setup alone carried its own tension. On one side of the table sat the 86-year-old who won 18 major championships and 73 times on tour, who founded the very tournament they were standing inside, and who no longer feels any need to soften his verdicts. On the other side sat the newcomer, barely a year into the job, armed with a plan he intends to detail more fully after the next policy board meeting, a plan aimed at reshaping the seasons that begin around 2027 and 2028. Rolapp promised to be diplomatic. Diplomacy, however, does not close the gap between a man protecting a legacy and a man determined to rebuild the house that legacy lives in. None of this reaches the level of a shredded memo or a secret meeting, and that honesty matters more than any cheap thrill. Rolapp did not lock these plans in a vault. He announced them from a podium in full view. The concealment was subtler and, in a way, more effective. He buried the human cost beneath the applause, let the relegation trapdoor hide behind the word meritocracy, tucked the caste system inside talk of sponsor price points, and framed a television-first overhaul as a gift to the fans. Nicklaus, without ever setting out to run an expose, dragged those consequences back into the light simply by refusing to lie about how the schedule made him feel. That is the real reason the tour flinched, and it is why a routine pre-tournament press conference turned into a moment the sport is still arguing about. The Golden Bear did not accuse anyone of a crime. He did something that lands harder. He told the truth about what the shiny new plan quietly costs, and he did it while standing on the ground he built with his own hands. The stakes now stretch far beyond one stubborn legend and one ambitious executive. What gets decided in the coming months will determine whether professional golf remains a sport with room for the underdog and the mid-sized tournament, or whether it hardens into a two-tier product engineered around television windows and sponsor budgets. Nicklaus has fired his warning shot calmly and without apology, and the man holding the blueprint now has to decide how much of that warning to actually hear. The next chapter belongs to Rolapp, and every golf fan watching should be paying very close attention to what he chooses to do with it. If this breakdown gave you the real story instead of the recycled version, do me one favor before you go. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and drop your verdict in the comments. Is Jack Nicklaus the last honest voice in golf? Or is Rolapp the future the sport actually needs? Tell me below, share this with the one golf friend who argues about everything, and stick around because the moment Rolapp reveals the full plan, we break down every buried detail right here first.